I am so excited. I've just finished my first quilt and I can't wait to show everybody. Oh, but I do have to just put the binding on, but otherwise the teacher said it's all done. You want to see? What do I do? The teacher didn't cover this in class. How am I supposed to hang it up and show everybody? What am I going to do? So this happens all the time. You take a class, they go through how to do the project, and then tell you to quilt as desired, and off you go, you're good and running. And they never really tell you how to put a hanging sleeve on. Or if you buy a pattern, there's usually no mention of how to make a hanging sleeve. It's just one of those things that people expect you to know how to do. Well, today I'm going to show you how to do it. Now, as with most things in quilting, there are many different ways to accomplish the same task. Today I'm going to show you how I do it, which I like because there's no measuring and very little math involved whatsoever. So here we go. You want to take your quilt along the top edge, whatever fabric you're going to make your sleeve out of, you just lay that across the top and you cut it the exact width of your quilt top. It's that simple. And then we just need to iron the ends of the sleeve. So this is the wrong side of the fabric. You're going to fold it up about 1/2 inch. Now you could use a hem guide if you have one, but why bother? We'll just eyeball it. It doesn't need to be exact. You want to iron it, press it, so it's about 1/2 inch. And then you're just going to fold in this raw edge up to the crease line that you just did, all the way along, and press it again. And again, it doesn't have to be exact, it doesn't have to be precise, just like that. And then you're just going to stitch right along here, keeping your stitching line even with the creased edge, not the folded edge here, but just run a stitch up there. Repeat for the other side, and then we'll go on to the next step. So let me go sew that real quick, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I went ahead and stitched the ends. You know, I did forget to tell you, I cut the piece of fabric about 9 inches wide, which will end up with about a 4-inch sleeve. Now, sometimes if you enter in certain shows, they might have a requirement that you need a 5-inch sleeve or whatever, so you just need to adjust the width for that if your show so dictates. But let me show you what I did. So I told you to line your stitching line up with the folded edge over here and not, or the outside edge rather than this folded edge. So if you see up on the top here, it's a little wider than it is down here, but on the pretty side, the seam looks nice and straight. So the next thing we want to do is fold the sleeve in half lengthwise, pretty side out, wrong sides together, and we're going to press along this long edge. But before we take the iron to it, we're going to scooch this down about 1/4 inch. Just about 1/4 inch. And I'll show you why that's important in just a little bit. But and then we're going to press the whole length of it. Just like that. Easy squeezy, and we'll be done. Almost there. And that's that. So now we have our sleeve, and the crease is not quite in the middle. It's a little off center. So we have a short side and we have a wide side, a thin side and a wide side. So we want to lay this on the quilt so that the thin side is against the quilt. And we want to line up our raw edges so that they're even. And just center this along the top edge of the quilt. Just eyeball it, no need to measure. And we want to make the raw edges of the sleeve even with the raw edges of the top of the quilt. And then we're just going to pin it. Now, I won't make you sit here and watch me pin this whole thing. but you would pin it all along and then put your binding on as you normally would, and it'll catch the raw edges of the sleeve in there. Now, when I do that, I usually try and put a couple of pins along this folded edge, just so when you're sewing and applying the binding, that this doesn't flop around and get caught anywhere where it's not supposed to be. So you would apply your binding as usual, and then do a little bit of hand sewing, which we'll cover in just a minute, and that's that. So what if you've already put the binding on your quilt and you forgot to put the sleeve on? Can't say that I've ever done that, at least more than half a dozen times. So you start out the same. You take your sleeve fabric, you cut it the width, you put the little hems on the ends. All that part is exactly the same. And then you fold it right sides together along the length, and you do a 1/4 inch seam all the way down the length of this. And then you press it so that the seam is in the middle, like that. Oops. We'll pretend the seam is there, and you press it so that the seam is in the middle of the back side, and you would apply this to the top. And then we want to do the same thing. You want to scooch this up about a 1/4 inch so that this top edge is puffier than this flat edge that's against the quilt. And you'd press all the way down there, pin it, and then hand sew it all into place. And I'll show you how to do that in a minute. But both methods that I've showed you, you end up with one short side that's against the quilt and one long side that's to the outside of the quilt. And let me show you what that is, or what that's for. Now, if you do yoga, at the very end of yoga, you do namaste. This is our quilting namaste. This is your quilt, and this is the pole. If you have a round pole and a flat quilt, and you try and stick that round pole into the sleeve, the quilt's going to want to bend around it. Here, let me show you. If I have the pole like this, and I have my hanging sleeve, the top of the quilt is going to want to bend around the top of the pole. That doesn't look very good. But if you put just that little 1/4 inch inside the hanging sleeve and incorporate that in there, then it just gives a little bit more room so that it allows the quilt to lie flat and doesn't have to roll over the top of the pole. That's it. But that little step will make your quilts look better once they're hanging up. So let me get this ready, and then I'll show you how to do the hand quilting part. Well, I went ahead and got everything all ready, and I'm going to show you how to do the hand stitching part. Now, normally I would do this at the same time that I'm hand stitching the binding down, but due to video production schedules, and oh gosh, that just sounds so important, we're doing things a little bit out of order, but that's okay. All works out in the end. So see this little poof right here? That's that little 1/4 inch scooch that we did, so that the short side is against the quilt and the wider side is away from the quilt. And that just gives you that little tunnel that will allow the rod to go through. So all I've done, I started already. I started stitching down this side. And all I'm doing is a simple whip stitch. Now for this type of stitching, I like to use a milliner's needle, which is long and thin. It does have a very tiny eye though, so you will have to have a needle threader handy, or a kid. So you just do a simple whip stitch all the way down the back side here. Now you're kind of going from sewing on the inside to sewing on the outside. So when you turn the corner, there's a little trick. Here's how that goes. So I'm just going to take a stitch. Now if you don't know, a whip stitch is simply taking a couple threads of the backing fabric. You don't want to go to the front, and just a couple threads of the sleeve fabric and putting them together. And then I'm going to take an extra stitch in the same spot that grabs both layers of the sleeve, which will transition us from stitching on the inside to stitching on the outside. So now I can continue my whip stitch down the back of the quilt here. And I'm just grabbing a couple of threads of the backing fabric and a couple threads of the sleeve fabric. A little tough spot because all the seams come together right there. And we just continue all the way down. And when you get all the way to the other end, you're going to turn the corner just like you did this one and sew up the other side, and then you'll be done. And your sleeve will be on there. So that's it. That's my method for no measuring, no muss, no fuss. Get the sleeve on your quilt. Hope you learned something. See you next time. All right, so I watched the video. I got my sleeve on. See, I have my nice little tunnel. Let's put the stick in so I can show you what I did. You ready?